Many people may have been surprised to learn that New South Wales does indeed have a chief psychiatrist. Firstly, do you mind sharing with us a little bit about your role, such as have you been involved in advising the government about the impact of the ongoing lockdown on people's mental health since the very beginning?
Thank you for asking. That's an important question. Yes, I have. One of the roles that I have is that in the event of a disaster, and the pandemic is a disaster for New South Wales and the world really, there are specific duties that I have, and that includes that we look at providing advice to government as to what the mental health impacts might be. You would have seen it after things like bushfires and droughts. That's something that we've also unfortunately been accustomed to, and we have specific responses for mental health services because we know all of these events have a significant and lasting impact on the mental health of the community as well as on the physical health. And in the event of the pandemic, because we haven't seen something like this for over a century, we really need to go back and look at how is this going to impact on mental health, and what can we do to assist. So we've in a fortunate space, really, in many ways, because of the technology that we've got at our disposal. So particularly in the early days of the pandemic and more recently in the lockdown, when people really can't mobilise all that effectively, in the old days they would have been cut off from their supports, whether they're health supports or family supports. Now we can actually use the technology, and we've gave advice and got great assistance both from the state and the Commonwealth government in enabling the use of things like telehealth, platforms like from here.
Can you talk to us briefly about the signs that people might recognise in themselves if this lockdown is indeed having an impact on them? What should people be aware of?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think it's an important issue for us to talk about regularly, and also for people to check on themselves and check with their loved ones. There are actually some fairly simple things that we can all keep track of. Things like sleep. If you're sleeping well, then you're probably managing the stress reasonably well. Insomnia is a really early sign of stress, as is losing a sort of a regular diet. People who stop doing things that they would normally like doing, such as getting out in the fresh air, exercising, staying in contact with friends and family, even virtually. When people lose interest in those things, that's a bad sign. I think if people are feeling overwhelmed, having trouble managing everyday problems, and having difficulties with concentration, or even feeling more irritable than usual, those are all signs. It's also important in the adult population to keep track of things like alcohol consumption, and also the diet. And many people indulge in comfort eating when they're under stress. And in the short term, that's not necessarily a harmful thing, but over a prolonged period, that can actually bring harms. And more importantly, it's a sign that maybe they need to look at what's happening in their lives which is adding to the stress, what can they control, and if they really feel like they're doing everything they can and then they should actually at that point look for advice. And the important thing about organisations like Lifeline, Kids Healthline, Beyond Blue, and websites like that is that they're very much there to offer advice and suggestions. So you don't need to feel like you're in crisis before you seek that kind of assistance. You should go and ask questions about, well, am I dealing with things the most effectively way I can, or can they give me some advice on how I can improve on that?
Some people's concerns probably wouldn't all be able to be solved with a chat, though. I mean, some people are concerned right now about how they're going to make ends meet. It's not such an easy problem to fix. Do you expect that people who are providing counselling services at the moment will have important information to hand, such as government business support, other supports and telephone numbers, for instance, for people calling to just make sure that they are in touch with all of the right and appropriate services at this time?
To pick up your first point there, I think that we do expect people to either experience a deterioration in their mental health or to have worsening of pre-existing mental health problems through the stress of the pandemic. And we have increased the range of some of our services and the access to our services in anticipation of that. And we are keeping close track of the demand for services. So, we shouldn't trivialise that. It's an enormous stress. One of the things which does make a difference between in terms of the impact has been the financial assistance of various kinds that's been offered by various governments. That's absolutely crucial, and I have no doubt we would be in a much more difficult space in terms of everyone's mental well-being if we didn't have that kind of support.
And so finally, if you can possibly give everyone watching some hope, some advice about how best to look after themselves at this time and how best to look out for their friends and loved ones, even though they might be missing their physical presence.
That's an important question as well. The word you use there is hope. It is very important to maintain a sense of hope. We will get through this. It's knocking us around, undoubtedly, and we don't know how long it's going to last. But sometimes when you don't know how long something is going to last, you think it's going to go forever. It's not. We will get through this, and it's very important, particularly when talking with young people, that we talk honestly about the restrictions that we're all facing and the difficulties we're facing and the uncertainties. But it's also important to maintain optimism. It's important not to catastrophise because people, particularly young people, can overinterpret that and they can lose a sense of hope. And lastly, I would say it's important to talk. So when we have contact with people, it's important to talk about, well, how are you coping? How are you managing? This is hard, and be prepared to talk about yourself and talk about others. It's one of those amazing things is that when you actually talk about how you're coping with something and share that with another person who's interested, it actually makes a difference. It helps. A burden shared is a burden halved, and there's no doubt about that when it comes to coping with these stresses.